Savage, Dogman, Sasquatch, Feud. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was young, I grew up accepting as fact that not only were both Bigfoot and Dogman real, but they both had clans which were warring on the land behind my family's property. The stories go back to long before I was born. I'll give you my version of the family's history with these two giant battling cryptids, although I'll probably forget a lot of parts. There are so many different anecdotes about both creatures. Sometimes someone in the family would just see one creature or the other from a distance, but other times quite involved dramas took place, which the family unwillingly got swept up into. Our family home was in Brockway, Pennsylvania, but not in the town proper. We had a house in the woods to the north and west of there. It was impossible to get anything delivered directly to us, so we were always having to go into town to collect our mail at the post office. None of my friends had to live like that, and they would all remind me of this fact whenever they could. It was hard to get any kids who weren't weird to want to come visit me at home, so I usually only had one or two really good friends at any one time. When I was 16 and 17, though, I had a friend we'll call Brian who loved to stay over because he was so into cryptids. Back then we just called them monsters. I had always thought of the monsters behind our property in the way you might regard a family of bears living on your land. I was afraid of them, and I wanted to avoid them. Brian had an entirely different perspective. He didn't grow up in the woods. He grew up watching In Search Of on TV. And he grew up being told by his parents that Bigfoot and werewolves are not really out there in the darkness. To me, he was a weirdo. But I didn't really have any other friends, so I guess that made me a weirdo too. It wasn't my place to judge the other weirdos, since I was the one living in the woods with Dogman. So Brian caused me to become interested in this subject that I had grown up being bored and annoyed by. How can a kid be bored by monster stories? If they all start off with, "You'd better be a good boy and always obey your elders because monsters," then your mind, ears, and imagination are turned off before the story even begins. To me, monster stories were not cool, scary anecdotes narrated by Mr. Spock on TV. To me, monster stories were nagging, hectoring lectures imposed upon me by older relatives while I was trying to watch TV. Brian got himself invited to my family's events whenever a relative he hadn't met yet was visiting. He had one of those old-school handheld cassette tape recorders with a weird little tiny microphone that he would hold in front of my relatives' mouths as they talked, and he would interview them about their monster experiences. He'd wait till later in the evening when they got, loosened up and relaxed before asking them to tell their stories. And they'd often go on, talking about the old days, not just the parts about cryptids, but all of it. I had an Aunt Ellen who had a creepy Dogman encounter that almost got her injured, or worse. She was driving east or south on Game School Road, which is a little two-lane highway that leads north and west out of town. It was dark out, and there are no lights on that road, so Aunt Ellen said she knew she should have been being more careful. There's woodland on either side, and there's nothing to prevent an animal, or even a person, from walking out into the road right in front of your vehicle. There was no traffic out that night, though, so Aunt Ellen had a growing, but false, sense of security. So that scenario I just described of the animal jumping out in front of the car actually happened, but Aunt Ellen said it was something that looked like a werewolf. When it ran out onto the road, it did it in such a way as to give the impression that it had been waiting there for her for some time. It had clawed hands in front of itself, in much the way a monster from the movies would do it. It seemed to be trying to be frightening, and Aunt Ellen said that when she panicked and swerved to avoid hitting it, the creature got this look on his monstrous face that appeared to her to be some sort of evil grin or smirk. The front end of Aunt Ellen's car crashed into a tree, wrecking it and causing her to lose consciousness for a few minutes. When she woke up, she couldn't see the Dogman anywhere, but she didn't presume that meant he was gone. Now, obviously, those were the days before cell phones, so Aunt Ellen had to get out of that vehicle and walk to a telephone. Doing the math in her head and not remembering any nearby gas stations or public phone booths, she figured she may as well walk home and use the phone there. Aunt Ellen said she was preoccupied with making sure she wasn't seriously injured as she took her first few tentative steps onto the road, testing her feet, her ankles, her legs, and finding them in basically good working order. As she began her long trek in the very dark night through the even darker woods, Aunt Ellen said she could hear twigs snapping and something moving somewhere in the darkness, just out of her range of vision. When she stopped moving, the sounds stopped as well, and when she started moving again, the creepy sounds resumed. The entire walk home, she felt like someone or something was about to pounce on her. At one point, she told Brian that she called out to whoever was in the woods, asking him or her or it to just finish her off already. And if he, she, or it was just trying to scare her, then he should go do something to himself that I won't repeat here. She said the sounds stopped, and she went home, called AAA from her landline, then laid down on a couch downstairs in her house by a window looking out onto the dark backyard. Aunt Ellen said she closed her eyes for a few minutes to rest them, and then she heard a tapping at the window pane. Sitting up surprised, she told me that she saw glowing animal eyeshine outside in the darkness, staring back in at her. My friend Brian was able to get different kinds of cryptid encounter anecdotes out of my family, different from the cautionary kind they told to me to cause me to find monsters annoying. In the stories that Brian collected, a picture was painted of two kinds of cryptids, whose behavior seemed to have a certain consistency to it. The Dogman seemed more interested in scaring people and causing panic or disaster than behaving like a conventional canine or even a conventional predator. The Bigfoot, on the other hand, seemed to divide his time between peeking out from behind trees at people or engaging in turf battles with the Dogman. My grandfather on my mother's side, Grandpa Joe, told Brian a story about seeing one Bigfoot barge in on a pack of Dogmen that he had been tracking and spying on. Grandpa Joe was a hunter, and he had a number of wild stories about fighting with bears and cougars, but his most amazing story of all was the Bigfoot Dogman turf battle of 1957. So there had been a family that started to build a house in the woods behind where Grandpa lived. For some reason, the house was abandoned, half-finished, and the family disappeared out of that area. Grandpa had gotten into the habit of going back there in the woods and salvaging parts of the place to use for repairs on his own house. One late afternoon as he approached the property, he noticed other figures moving about in the distance. Hiding himself and watching, Grandpa Joe was stunned to see a pack of large dogs, all milling about on their hind legs, walking like human beings. Grandpa had never seen these creatures before, but he had heard his neighbors talk about the Pennsylvania werewolf. He just thought they were crazy old drunkards, but maybe they took to drink to cope with the trauma of encountering the kinds of creatures that Grandpa Joe was eyeballing from his hiding spot. He was trying to understand what they were doing because, to be honest, from a distance, it looked like they were rummaging around for things to scavenge for home repairs. Same thing that he was doing. Without the slightest bit of warning, a huge Sasquatch, much larger than any of the Dogmen, leaped into the scene screaming like he was Tarzan or something. In one hand, he held a plank of wood he had picked up from the debris. Was he repairing his home as well? No, he was swinging for the fences, wildly trying to bash the Dogmen on their dog heads. The canines were not as tall and did not appear as strong either, but they had speed and agility on their side and they were able to dance around the Bigfoot, snapping at him from multiple sides, while he kept narrowly missing, crushing their skulls. The Dogman learned quickly to make their attack and retreat fast. That Bigfoot had canine teeth, just as large as any possessed by the canine animals. In other words, his fangs were no less impressive or terrifying than the dog's fangs. Brian pressed Grandpa Joe to put a number to the height of the various creatures, and he thought about it. Well, he said there was about 2 feet difference when they were close together. So if the Dogman was 5.5 feet tall, then the Squatch was 7.5. I'd guess that the Dogmen were more my height, though, and I'm a half inch under 6 feet. That would make the Bigfoot maybe 8 feet, maybe taller than that. Grandpa said he knew it sounded crazy, but that was why he avoided talking about the height until he was directly questioned. So that Bigfoot was outnumbered, but he swung his plank of wood around vigorously, battling as if the fate of the world depended on him winning. The dogs would snap at him, and he would snap right back at them. It seemed inevitable that the Dogman would overtake that Bigfoot, when suddenly Grandpa insisted that the entire forest exploded in angry, howling sounds, and from 5 or 6 different directions at once. Huge Bigfoot, even larger than the one already in the battle, raced forward. One of them ran past Grandpa Joe, maybe only 12 or 15 feet away. The battle had escalated to pure savage fury. My grandfather said he looked at what was happening and felt certain that there were going to be lives lost in this incident he was witnessing. In order to keep his own name off that list, my Grandpa Joe said he turned around and ran home, tail between his legs. That was the last time he scavenged anything from that half-finished house. For the first time, he had a guess as to why that family abandoned the prospect of living back there. That was the year Grandpa installed taller fencing around the back of the property. Most of the cautionary tales told to me as a child stemmed from that incident. There were monsters in those woods. These were violent and angry monsters. They were so violent and so angry that they didn't just want to eat up little boys, but they wanted to eat up each other too. This was an undercurrent of horror in the background of my childhood, but since I never wanted to go in the woods anyway, it never became a big deal to me, like it seemed to be for my friend Brian. Speaking of Brian, he was constantly trying to get me to take him for a walk in those woods, as if I were a tour guide or something. I had no idea what went on inside those trees. I stayed in the house, or at most the backyard. There was nothing Brian could do or say to get me to take one step inside that forest. Until, one day, Brian brought over 2 really attractive young women our age, who were both big fans of the Bigfoot. They gave me the whole treatment, which at that age I was unused to. I had never received so much positive attention from female humans in all of my entire life as I received from those 2 beautiful young women on that late afternoon, and so I weakened, and then I buckled. When Brian wanted me to walk in the woods, I knew nothing about them. Once these 2 girls asked, well, then I was an expert on that forest. I knew it like the back of my hand, sure. Into the woods we went, and we were almost immediately lost. It was just as quick as that. It felt like we'd been walking for 90 seconds before each of the 4 of us were completely turned around. The girls were getting very antsy, and Brian was making things worse by mocking their fear. I thought you ladies wanted to see monsters, he taunted them. You're scared of shadows. What'll you do if real monsters show up? And not right then, not on cue, but really just a minute or 2 later, this freaking dog-headed monkey man pounced out at the girls, making them scream and run into my arms and Brian's. The thing is, that Dogman, he wasn't acting like he wanted to capture the girls. He wasn't behaving like he wanted to eat them. He was acting more like a fake monster in a scary dark ride at an amusement park. It was like he was jumping out and saying boo, more than behaving like a normal predator. When I saw him make the girls scream, that was my impression of what had just happened. He was trying to scare, not to maim or kill. Why would he be trying to do that? Well, no matter why, the creature, who was the size of a normal man, around 6 feet or so, growled and walked around us. I didn't realize at first, but he seemed to be herding us into one spot. What would happen when he was finished with that? I was not looking forward to finding out. I looked around for something I could use as a weapon, like Captain Kirk fighting the Gorn. I was pretty frightened, but I was also the one who grew up with stories of those creatures as part of my everyday life. I had never seen a Dogman before, but I was still the most used to what they were supposed to be like. I knew it wanted us scared, and something about that gave me a sense of bravery. Nevertheless, I am not Captain Kirk, and I came up with no miracle solutions to our problem. The Dogman herded us up against this impenetrable patch of trees, and as it walked over to us on its hind legs, its sharp claws and teeth looking every bit like those of a meat-eating creature, I began to question my theory that the Dogman lives off of our fear. Maybe he just enjoys our fear before he feasts on our flesh and on our blood. There were 4 of us and 1 of him, and he was only our size. I tried to think of a way to fight him, but somehow it just seemed impossible. I began to wonder how bad this next part was gonna be when 2 trees were parted forcefully, and out charged what I at first took to be an immense bull gorilla. This creature was way too tall to be a gorilla, though. It was taller than a bear. It also didn't have that pot belly that gorillas tend to have, and it stood up straighter and taller. It had fangs like a gorilla, though, and it showed them off as it roared so loudly that it hurt my ears. The Dogman now had something more important to attend to, so we were ignored, and we took off running away. The Bigfoot was picking up rocks and sometimes just clumps of dirt and hurling them at the face of that Dogman. The last thing I saw was the ape man tackling the canine, and the 2 of them knocking a grown tree completely down as they fell hard into it. The 4 of us ran away, not really knowing where we were heading, until one of the girls spotted my family's house through the woods. The Bigfoot had sent us running in the correct direction, so we got lucky on that late afternoon. Well, now I can say I've been inside the forest behind the house, I told myself. Scratch that off the bucket list. It's something I never need to do again, and a place I never need to visit ever. So my family sold the house while I was in college, but the activity had seemed to stop before then anyhow. We got the impression that both species had developed different places to habituate during the summer. I was in Pennsylvania just a couple months ago, meeting up with an old friend from junior high school, and she told me she knew the current owner of my family's former house. She took me by to introduce me, and wow, all the memories just flooded back, you know. Looking out at those woods behind that property still gave me a chill. The current owner, at one point, got a weird look on his face, and he asked me confidentially if he could ask a personal question. When that question turned out to be that he wanted to know if I believed in Bigfoot, I knew the habituation had not truly ended. The activity must have just quieted down for a while, but never fully gone away. In answer, I asked that man if he believed in Dogman, and judging by the reaction on his face, nothing in that area had actually changed at all. It continues to be the ongoing era of the Savage Dogman Sasquatch Feud.
April showers, Dogman flowers. It doesn't matter what your local weatherman says because the week of April 25th through 30th is the downpour of Dogman, the week of wet werewolves, and the Hound Hurricane. Why do atmospheric disturbances seem to happen so often during Dogman and other high-strangeness cryptid experiences? We will be examining alleged sightings and encounters with werewolf-type entities sent in to us by you viewers yourselves, where lightning and thunder, or else severe snow and hail seem to appear out of nowhere, either just prior to, during, or immediately following extremely terrifying run-ins with glowing-eyed, often upright walking canines. That's different, all new Dogman stories, each day from Monday through Saturday, right here on the Scary Stories channel. It never rains, but it pours. Dogman.
I've got some news that I'm dispersing. Roshan Gerald is this person. I'm telling him and her and you, sir. Roshan's our executive producer. Please join me in thanking our newest executive producer, Roshan Gerald, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. In exchange for their kind generosity, they gain access to our secret uncensored Dogman stories. Far too wild to ever tell on this channel. Now here is international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.